Good day, everyone. Thank you for joining us once again on another Connecting Conversations podcast. Today, we have the amazing Cynthia Davis CBE with us, who is going to tell us all about her work and the impact that she's making specifically within the diversity, equity, and inclusion space. So, we're here to have a really exciting discussion, informative discussion, but also a discussion where we can learn, reflect, grow, and motivate others within the space and ultimately make a change. So thank you, Cynthia, for joining us. Please give us an introduction and your wonderful accolade of your CBE. That would be amazing.
Thank you so much, Ivalka, for having me, and Carla as well. I'm excited to be here. So yes, I'm Cynthia V Davis CBE. I'm still getting used to the CBE title, still very new, only 2 weeks old. So still a baby in terms of my name. But yeah, and yeah, just pleasure to be here. And yeah, remind me again, what was the other part of the question I needed to answer?
Tell us a little bit why you were awarded this prestigious accolade.
I'm still drinking my coffee, by the way, in my lovely fancy mug. So
Yeah.
yeah, it might take me a little while to get going. So yeah, so the CBE, it was such a privilege to receive it, and it was for services to equality, diversity, and inclusion. And that's probably spanned over the last 10 years that I've been in this space. And I suppose to be rewarded, well, not even rewarded, but to just be acknowledged at, this kind of level. I was, just in awe, and still it feels very surreal in so many ways. So, but yeah.
Amazing. And what does that CBE mean to you, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, I think it's just really just a recognition of the hard work that's gone on over the last kind of 10 years. And I think, when I started my career, diversity and inclusion wasn't even anything that people were talking about at all. So this is 10 years of really trying to push around trying to drive more social impact and really try and get people to think differently. So, if I think back pre-COVID, even just going as early as pre-COVID, diversity inclusion still had a very different kind of meaning and how it resonated with people. And, we witnessed so many different changes from the Me Too movement through to the Black Lives Matter kind of, movement. So I think there's been a big shift around what diversity inclusion kind of means. And it's been amazing to see that work happening finally. And, so from the 10 years when I started doing it to get to this stage, it just feels really like valid that all the work and the groundwork that we were doing before really was so needed and so important. And it took a while for people to get along on that journey, but that recognition of receiving the CBE was just really, I suppose, just highlighting that this is important. This was worth fighting and championing for all those years when nobody really believed in it and nobody really wanted to talk about it. So I suppose to me, that's what it means. It's all that work and effort that went before was really worth it.
Yeah, well, that's beautifully summed up. And I think I have been privileged enough to see part of your journey in doing that work, and it's so well deserved. All the work that you and the team that have been doing over all these years.
No, thank
So, with that being said, tell us a little bit about your professional background. How did you even enter into the D&I, diversity and inclusion world, and where are you now?
Yeah, I suppose, how I got into DNI was really, I suppose, just out of sheer frustration and just wanting to drive change using what I knew and what I understood. So my background has really been in talent acquisitions, and the last 23 years of my life, and I feel so old when I say that, 23 years of my life has been in talent acquisition, and that's been working from corporates right through to big consultancy firms. And I suppose the journey that I've gone through in those organizations, where a lot of times they weren't really inclusive, they weren't organizations that's always supported people from different backgrounds and really understood people from different kind of backgrounds, really helped to shape what I experienced. And I think it was a lot of that kind of lived experience that I'd gone through around misogyny, around racism, around discrimination, over that stage of my career really made me kind of feel, there's a lot of inequality that still exists in this world. And I think the biggest turning point for me was when my daughter was born. It was the realization of the world that she was coming into, where she would always be judged because of the color of her skin, her gender would be held against her, who she ended up loving, would be viewed and analyzed, and around her ethnicity, and all these things played a big part in terms of being a parent and thinking, hang on a minute, what am I bringing this child into? This world still has, it's still not inclusive, it's still not supportive of anyone that's different. And I suppose it was really about, well, what can I do to try and make things better? And I believe that if you want to see change in the world, you've got to be part of that change. You can't wait for somebody else to go fix the world so it's better for that next generation if you're not prepared to do it yourself. So I think a lot of the work that I did and how I got into D&I was just really out of that pure frustration of, I have to fix this, I have to do something, and I have to be part of that solution of finding a way to make things better. So in 20, 30 years, when my daughter finally goes into the world, she finds it a little bit better than what I did, how I found it, or how my parents found it. So it's those steps that we're trying to take around eradicating some of these barriers that still exist in our everyday life. And that's how I got into the world of D&I and the world of trying to really drive real impactful change, and just try and use the skills that I had around bringing people together, around championing people from different kind of backgrounds, and shining a spotlight on the brilliance that is the diversity in our society. So yeah, it was really that led me to do the career that I have. And what's been the driving force behind everything that I've done is just that mission and purpose of, we've got to change things, we've got to do better for the next generation. It can't be every generation still experiencing this over and over again.
Yeah, no, certainly. And I think it's really important that, a lot of our lived experiences has led to us and has been the catalyst in driving and wanting more and wanting change. And you touched upon your daughter being quite a focal point in that. Now, if you just a bit of an offshoot to that, what what do you think, for children coming up into this world? What are your hopes are for people like your daughter in breaking down those systemic barriers? Is it something that, you know, is this something that we could reach? Is it something that you think you need to equip your daughter with more? And how have you ever had any challenging conversations with her about the color of her skin or the lack of accessibility in terms of her gender?
Yeah, and I think every parent at some stage, you do have that. And my daughter is of mixed heritage, so she comes from a mixed background. She's half white and half black. So there's those interesting conversations I've had to have with her around the two different cultures that she comes from. And she lived through the Black Lives Matter kind of movement. She heard everything that happened around the murder of George Floyd, and those were really difficult times as a parent to sit down with your child and finally talk about racism, and because everybody was talking about it at school. It was all over the TV. So I think it forced a lot of these conversations earlier on than maybe I was prepared to have. But I think it was good, because I think education is the way that we're going to change this, and we're going to change and dismantle some of these barriers that still exist in our society. And I think the more we can educate ourselves and learn from those experiences and try and do better, that's the only way that we're going to move forward as a society. So I think really equipping this younger generation to really understand around what's gone before. Let's not shy away from it. We need to have some of these brave, courageous conversations, but equip our young children to be able to go out into the world, better equipped than maybe I did, when I went into the world of work. And I think that's when we can really start to see that shift, and making sure that we're changing hearts and minds, but with the right information, so they're not hearing it secondhand, or somebody's not saying something that they, is offensive, because we've educated our kids, we've given them the right kind of way to to accept and coexist with people that are from different backgrounds and that are different from them. And I think that has to start from the home. That has to start with parents educating their children. That has to start from when they at schools have to really educate them around the difference in our society and be more accepting of that. And I think that's where we will see that change, and not having to tackle it once people are in the workplace, because at that point I think it's a little bit too late. We are trying to reverse all that damage that's happened way, you're talking 15, 20 years ago. So the earlier we can start to really have these conversations, the better it will be for that next generation. And I think that's where I get excited for all the work that's going on at the grassroots in the schools, and at the really early stages where children are still children and are seeing the world in this beautiful, very innocent way. If we can really capture their hearts and minds at that point, it just means the next generation is much better, we hope. And I say I live in hope and being very optimistic, that's the world I'd like my daughter to grow up in.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Enjoyed just listening to how even the narration that you have about your experience is so full of hope. As you said, it's so full of excitement and optimism. I think one of the questions that I feel really struck me, and this is maybe going back a step or two from when you first started sharing your incredible story, is you mentioned that when you started this journey, it was out of frustration, but you also started in a landscape that really this wasn't existent. What has kept you on the journey? Because going into a space where it doesn't exist, you're forging things from scratch, breaking really hard ground, if we're going to talk in almost like an agricultural figurative way of speaking, breaking ground for new seed sounds like what you were doing. And I think that takes courage and bravery. But my question is, what has kept you keeping on? Because now it sounds like you can acknowledge that all the time that you invested to stay committed to the cause, you are finally seeing fruit. But 10 years is no small joke and no easy feat. What has sustained you to keep going despite feeling like, am I the only voice here sometimes?
I think that the fact that there's still more work to be done, and this is never going to end, right? And we haven't reached the mountaintop yet. And I remember, I grew up, with parents that really talked a lot around people that were freedom fighters. So my family come from Zimbabwe and South Africa. So having people like Nelson Mandela that I grew up listening to, and his fights, he was in prison for 27 years for something that he believed in, and you have people like Martin Luther King, that were really championing all this and we're just walking in their footsteps to try and continue where they left off, and the more of us that are now vocal and coming up and speaking up in whatever small pocket of society that we can, however little we can, is all going to add into this big societal change and shift that we really are all hoping to see. So I think that's what keeps me motivated. That's what keeps me going, that there's still a lot of work to be done. We are nowhere near where we need to be. And I think it's great to acknowledge that progress has been made, and we have moved on a lot further than maybe where we were 10 years ago, maybe where we were 5 years ago. And I look at, before COVID, some of the things that we were trying to push around inclusion of, people being able to have flexible work, and everyone going, oh, that's never going to happen. It can't be done. And then obviously you have an event like COVID that makes that happen. And all of a sudden people are like, oh yeah, we can have inclusive workforces. Yeah, we can work remotely, So I think it's really, how do we keep pushing forward and changing hearts and minds? And sometimes you have these moments in time that force you to do that change, or to reflect in a different kind of way that you maybe weren't ready to reflect on. Watching the horrific murder of George Floyd in front of our eyes made sure that everyone had no excuse of why they weren't doing something around dismantling racism, whether you were a company that thought, okay, right, we haven't tackled this, but we need to do something. Finally, great. They now realize they needed to do something. And it's those kind of moments in time that I think are so key and so important to keep the conversation going. And this work will never get done. Even I think in my daughter's generation, they will still be championing it, But what excites me about the new generation coming through is they hold us to account now. You know, I look at the younger generation coming through, people like your Greta Thunberg. You know, they're brave, they're bold, they're courageous. You know, they're vocal, they stand up. You know, they speak up, and how amazing is that? You know, and for me, that gets me excited, because I know that they've been empowered by what they've seen around. This isn't right, and therefore we have to take responsibility and accountability for the world that we want to live in. So I think that's where it gets really, really exciting, the fact that, you know, collectively as a society, we're now are the ones that are taking ownership on making this change, and not always just waiting to be given permission, or for leaders to drive the change, or to give us the agenda to go drive the change. We're taking it upon ourselves now to think, right, if it's not right, I'm going to speak up and I'm going to call it out, and we just become more empowered, I think.
Yeah, I totally agree. And you actually reminded me of a story that I was told just yesterday. Um, there at this motorsport event that I was at, there was quite a lot of females there, which was great because we want to have more females and ethnic diversity within STEM. So there was a lot of females engaging, and one of the females said at a lab event, and she was learning about all the different sciences and what goes on in the mechanics. And then she turned around to one of the facilitators and said, actually, I think I can do this. I really, really enjoy science. I
Mm,
never knew I did, but I think I can do this now. And
mm,
that fills me with so much hope and so much inspiration to know that once we, like you talked rightly about, getting to those grassroots, educating, highlighting to our young people, our leaders of the future, we will progress so much further. And yes, things aren't where we need it to be right now, but
yeah,
the younger generation, I am they motivate me to keep going. Like my sister, for instance, she's 18. She holds me to account every single day.
mm. And we need that in our society. And I think also, I think they need to see role models as well. They need to see people who are also championing this. And you can't be what you can't see. So I think the more they can see, hang on a minute, that person's like me, they've got a background like me, and they're doing this. I need to do that. And it gives them that hope and that ability to think it's okay to speak up. It's, you know, it's okay to challenge. So I think role modeling with the right kind of role models, and giving them access to those role models who are driving change, who are change makers, I think is also really important. So they can see what's possible and what they
Yeah,
can aspire to do and achieve themselves as well.
certainly, certainly. And Carla, did you want to
Yeah, is that
chip in
okay?
here?
Yeah, I really appreciate you sharing just such a range of where you see the optimism is kind of emerging. And we've spoken a lot about, like, we can see that actually the next generation is probably the shining light of to see what potential we can enter into a much more positive future. I guess
Yeah.
my question is, going around what you acknowledged in terms of, there is without a doubt everybody saw on very public platforms the situation with the Black Lives Matter and the murder of George Floyd, and it caused everyone to stop and take notice. Where it sounds like young people are ready for change, would you say it's only the young people that are kind of harvest ready to be able to engage with these changes? Do you have hope and think that actually more change could also happen from some of the prior generations where life was looking a very certain way, cemented decade upon decade, generation upon generation, where elements of D&I were just not in the language? It was not something to consider. We were living in concepts of division that were quite acceptable. And you mentioned South Africa, and that was a system that was ingrained in their legal system about separation and lack of diversity and disunity amongst people. We're privileged enough to live in the UK where we can walk side by side, live side by side with people that represent many different nations and cultures and still call ourselves British. But it's a different form of what we're looking at into the kind of landscape of D&I. Do you think there is scope that change can still happen from some of the prior generations that are now having to engage with this new wave of what life is doing with the D&I space? I don't know if that was clear, but I hope it.
Yeah, no, it is. And I'll give you a great example of that. I come from a family that didn't really understand a lot around LGBTQ plus, because I suppose when you're from certain aspects in Africa, it's still very illegal to be gay, and people get arrested and sent to prison. And I remember sitting down and having this conversation with my dad, because one of my best friends is gay, and for a long time my parents just didn't realize it was, because it was just one of my friends. And And when I remember approaching the subject, and then they were like, oh, we didn't realize. And I said, well, has anything changed about how you view them? And, they kind of sat there and they were very quiet for a while. And they were like, well, no. And I was like, is anything about who he is any different now that you know he's gay? And they're like, well, no. So it was that education of trying to educate them around, accepting people for just who they are. The fact that they now discovered that my friend was gay didn't make him any different from the person that came and sat, used to come to our house every night for dinner and would all coerce. So I think it's really just changing their minds around it's still the same person, right? And I had to educate my parents around LGBTQ plus, and they for a long time it took a while for them to really accept the world, because it was so new to them. It was a world that they probably didn't, for years, had never really been exposed to, or really had any access to. But now that they've got somebody who was part of our extended family friend, they started to ask questions, and it was great for me to be able to get to answer those questions. And I remember inviting my friend over for dinner, and I said, they've got questions they would like to ask, could you talk to them? And it was so lovely having that, creating that safe space for them to learn and ask without the fear of getting anything wrong, or without the fear of, asking the wrong kind of question or anything like that, because they just wanted to know and they wanted to educate themselves. And I think that's beautiful when we can really bring these conversations, educate people. And I think that's the same with the work that we do in D&I, is how do we educate people? Yeah, you might have not talked around race before, but let's sit down, let's talk about it, let's ask those questions in a safe space that we learn and we educate ourselves, so we're better prepared, we're better to understand different cultures and different kind of backgrounds, and be able to support in the right kind of way, be better allies, be better supporters of different communities. So I think, yeah, it does give me hope, because I think where people are willing to learn and to listen, there are always people that are there and happy to educate them. But there's got to be the willingness to want to learn and the willingness to want to understand. There are people that are just so closed off that no matter what you do and say, they ain't interested, they're not listening. And sometimes it's harder to change those hearts and minds. But I think those that are very open-minded and will put their hands up, say, I don't know, I want to do better, I want to learn, I want to understand. There's always people that are there to support and educate and do it in the right way.
Amazing. No, that's definitely really important. And I think in terms of how we then look at that within the workplace, do you think those sentiments and those different approaches translate to how we look at D&I and challenge, but also empower D&I within a corporate environment, for instance? Do you think that that's translatable in how we communicate with our leaders?
Yeah, massively so. But to your point, to communicate with leaders, it's got to be modeled by the leaders, right? The leaders have got to be the ones that are also demonstrating and leading by example. But I think if I think of any team or any organization, you always have people from different walks of life, different cultures, different religions, different backgrounds. And it's really, how do you foster that form of really understanding each other and working collectively together and supporting each other, but also celebrating those differences as well, so they're not, your differences aren't held against you. So I think there's a way that organizations can do that and foster that inclusive culture that allows people to just be themselves and to not have to hide or shy away from taking their whole selves to work. And I remember I grew up in Yorkshire, and when I moved from Yorkshire to London, I had a really, really strong Yorkshire accent. And I remember coming into this company, and and I was speaking to clients on the phone, and my manager at the time pulled me aside and she said, "Can you put on a posh voice, because no one can understand your Yorkshire accent?" And I was like, "Hang on a minute," So I was just like, so the message of what I was saying to clients was exactly the same, but she wanted me to have a different accent, which meant I had to change who I was to try and fit into her idea of how I should sound to clients, which I struggled with that for a very, very long time. But I think at that point I was still quite younger in my career, still very early stages, and just didn't really have the voice and to be able to speak up in the way that I do now. But that always stuck with me. And, for ages, I'd go home and I'd practice speaking in my posh voice so that I didn't sound northern. And it's things like that people don't realize the impact they have on others and on those around. So somebody's accent being almost held against them, it's like, what's all that about? So, yeah, I just think we just need people to understand how do you let people be who they are? How do we celebrate that authenticity that makes us all unique and all amazing in our own way? That's what we really need to be fostering when people come into the world of work, and not trying to change them to conform or get them to fit into our idea of what they should be or what's acceptable in a workplace.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think, yes, I completely concur in terms of there is an element of we need to embrace difference. We need to embrace that everyone is not going to come from the same background or same accent or same languages. There is so much, especially within the UK, there's so much diversity within within Britain. Why are we not embracing that more? Why are we not bringing that in? Why are we not exploring different avenues to recruit people of that nature
Yeah.
and of that background? Why are we not utilizing our, communities and engaging with our communities to really accelerate and really make noise around what is right and just about, bringing change into the sphere. So, I can talk about this all day with you. Like, literally, I have so many other questions. But I think the one question that I want you to educate us as well as our audience is there anything that you've noted in terms of different trends that could be upcoming, or are there anything new you perceive that we should be on the lookout for when it comes to inclusion and fostering inclusion in the workplace?
Yeah, I think we live in a world that's ever evolving, right? And it's just not standing still, and it's never going to stand still. And I think the world of work, especially, has evolved a lot. If I think of what's coming ahead, we've got people that now work flexibly, that work remotely. It's really trying to make sure that we can still foster that inclusiveness of everybody being supported in the right kind of way. So things like flexible work are not going to go away. People now want that. People actually turning away jobs that's like, you got to be in the office 5 days a week, 9 to 6. They're like, no thank you, I don't want that. I want to be able to have that flexibility of working how I work, because we've gotten used to this, having this world of work and personal life coexisting in a finely in a way that is accepting for us as individuals. So for somebody to then dictate how that needs to be, people are like resisting now. So I think that's the trend. I think is still going to carry on into the the new year. But also things like AI, is one of the biggest things we just need to be mindful of, because that AI revolution is coming, and it's how prepared our organizations around how that's going to have an impact on their workforce, on the people that are maybe doing the day-to-day jobs as they are now. In the future, they might look very different. If I look at things like ChatGPT, that's revolutionized how people write things or find information or do things. So there's a lot of change that's coming. It's how do we make sure that change is actually for the good and not for the bad? How do we make sure that the technology that's coming is also very inclusive? That needs to be the people that are involved in creating that technology also need to be inclusive. They also need to come from a variety of backgrounds to be able to create products that are fit for the future, for everybody, and not just particular demographics. So I think that, to me, is where I see some of the trends and some of the threats that could come into the world of work as we know it. But I think, with change, it's really about embracing it, because change is good if it's done in the right kind of way. But it's just making sure that organizations are prepared and are ready for that change, and are fully supportive, because not everybody's going to see it as a good thing. There will be some people that will feel a little bit threatened and a little bit unsure, and not quite know how to deal with it. So that support, is really, really key and important in terms of how we support the workforce in the future of work that's coming ahead.
Amazing. No, and you summed that up brilliantly. I don't think I could have said it any better. And I think, like, even when you touched upon AI, I actually did a post on LinkedIn about a week or so about that, because it's so, like, is AI good? Is it bad? Like, where do we find the balance in something
Yeah.
so new, so recent,
Yeah.
in either it can accelerate our change to the greater good, but it
Yeah.
also can be our greatest threat.
Yeah.
So how do
Yeah.
we utilize it effectively? And I think that is to say about everything that we do in terms of the D&I space, like even down to initiatives and ERGs. Are we using them in the right way in
Yeah.
order to accelerate change? Are we using them to a disadvantage
Yeah.
that further isolates and excludes people? So thank you so much for your insight and your
Oh
thoughts
no,
and
it's
sharing
been
your story.
it's been really exciting. As you said, we could really talk all day. I mean, this is something that I just love speaking about, because it's really, really important, right? It shapes who we are, and who we become as we move forward as individuals, but also collectively as colleagues, as friends, as allies to different kind of communities. So I think, the one thing I would kind of just say is for all of us to continue to learn, to continue to educate ourselves, to continue to just be open-minded, to be more accepting, and really just try and really, speak up when things aren't right, or when we see things aren't the way that they should be, and empower ourselves to be able to do that. And I think that's what I'd love to leave the listeners with, just a little bit of empowerment to say, we've got the power to create the world that we want to see and live in and succeed in, but it's on all of us to play our part, whether that's challenging when things aren't done in the right kind of way, and speaking up for others, being better allies, and showing up for others as well. So all those things are so important for us to have this world that we all hope we can succeed, and we can thrive, and we can enjoy, and future generations can pick up and enjoy as well. So yeah, that would just be the one thing I'd love to leave everybody with. Be the
Thank you.
change you want to see.
There we go. There we
Amazing.
go. And to end off the podcast as well, 3 key words: being open-minded, acceptance, and show up. If there's anything that this conversation you leave this conversation with, make sure it's those 3 words. Thank you, Cynthia, once again for
Oh,
joining on Connecting Conversations, and we'll stay in touch. Thank you.
Thank you,
wonderful.
Cynthia.
Thank you both. That was amazing. Thank you so much.